you could be doing everything right, but if you're not addressing a certain trauma, or if you're not aware of that trauma, of like, that you need to deal with it and process it and release it, you'll always tick to like, say, if you're doing everything right, say 70%, but you'll never get to that 90 plus. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, there's plenty of options, but yeah, I mean, I love Latin America as well. I speak Spanish, so I'm very much gravitated towards there. Yeah, but it's quite far from Australia and my family, but I do love it there as well. See what happens. Yeah, I honestly don't know what I'm doing. Like I've got accommodation here and my visa here, and then I'm going to Bali, and then I have nothing booked after that, which is like in September.
What is that process like with for you of uncertainty?
I kind of love it. Um, yeah, like I mean, it is nice to have some sort of plan, which I did have. Like for example, when I was in South America earlier this year, I knew that I wanted to come back to Asia. I just didn't know exactly where and for like how long. But yeah, I mean, I do love the mystery of not knowing as well. It just keeps life interesting. It keeps me motivated. It keeps me grounded. But so yeah, I sort of have like a rough plan and then I will adjust accordingly to that basically. So yeah, I mean, like I was going to go to Vietnam. That was the plan basically at the start of the year. I was like, I'll be in Vietnam, but I didn't think it was going to be 3 months. And then, yeah, like my mum was like, oh, I'm going to be in Bali in September. I'm like, great. That works out well for me. And then I've got some friends here who also live in Vietnam and they're going to go to Thailand as well at the same time. So it's good to have like a bit of a community here, because it can be hard when you're traveling, you can feel a bit isolated. But yeah, they're going to be in Thailand at the same time, which is great. So yeah, we'll see what happens in terms of that.
How do you have, are these friends from Australia or friends that you've made online or?
Yeah, so a bit of a mixture actually. There's a couple of people I met that were from Australia, but I happened to meet them in Thailand last time I was there, and they're awesome. So a couple of people from, one person from Twitter who actually lives in Da Nang as well. Funnily enough, and he's very much in like the quantum space too, so that worked out really well. And then yeah, you just meet people along the way. I think, I've been trying very much to communicate a bit more with people. If I see someone at a cafe or something where I'm working a couple of times, I'll be sure to just I mean, prior I wouldn't be as much open-minded or like more open to talking to people, but I think it's good to just make those connections because you don't know who's on the other side as well. For example, I met someone at the beach in Da Nang, which is like the city just next to me. We're doing a workout. I ran into him and we had a chat, and it turns out that he's like in digital marketing and he had some health issues that he wanted to work out. So I was like, hey, let's make a deal. I'll help you with your health issues. He had like gyno, so I was helping him with that, sort of like breast development in the male tissue, a bit more estrogenic based. And yeah, he's in digital marketing, so he was like, I'll help you out with some stuff on your end. I was like, awesome. So, you never know who's on the other end of a connection, basically. And all it takes is just like a hello, how are you?
It's interesting to me that you said being on the move keeps you grounded. I feel like it's usually the opposite for people. And I'm curious if that, like, has it been hard to, I mean, you said sometimes you feel lonely. That to me would be the biggest obstacle if I was traveling all the time, is like I meet people and then I develop super strong connections with them and then I'm off to another place. It's like, fuck.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like it can definitely get lonely. Like you definitely have those days where you feel like isolated. Especially, for example, in Vietnam where I don't speak the language because I mean I've attempted it, but it's just like one of the most difficult things you'll ever learn. It took me like a month to say how are you, so I gave up after that. Um, but yeah, I mean, even here though, like I still, I'll go for a walk and you just say hello to everyone. Like everyone is just super friendly. So you still get that interaction per se. I still go to like the same cafes and work there, and they know me there, which is nice. I've had the fortune of having two of my best friends and my sister visit me. Like my sister's currently here right now, so that's worked out really well. Another bonus being close to Australia. But yeah, I mean, there is like pros and cons for sure. I think fortunately for me, I am quite introverted, which I didn't really learn until I stopped drugs and alcohol. I think that definitely plays a role. If you're more of like an extroverted type, it can definitely be hard, especially if you are working as well, because you're going to be working from home a bit. And there's just going to be, less socializing in general, basically. And then, as you said, you're on the move. So like you could make connections, which has happened. And then it's like you've gone before like you can hang out again, basically. But I mean, if you ever go back, you've always got people there that you can count on, which is cool as well.
Yeah. I want to get into dating and dating in that context, but I don't want to get into dating yet because I feel like that sometimes I get carried away and then that's like the whole podcast.
It's an interesting
Uh,
topic. It very
yeah.
much is.
Yeah. But what I want to, because I haven't been doing this, I'm realizing with the last few guests that I've had, like for people that don't know who you are, what you do, but also how you got to be someone that can do that.
Okay, so tracing back, I suppose I was very much into like diet and health and exercise my whole life. I loved sports. Australian football was one that I really, really loved playing back in the day. And then like I was always into weights, training, all those kinds of things. And it was always at the back of my head. And then I suppose once you hit 18, 19, 20, that's when partying and things become play a big role. And that started to take a priority for at least 5, 6, 7 years, very much so. So I've basically gone, I've seen it all in terms of just like how I felt emotionally, physically, all those kinds of things. So it's just like me teaching myself on my own health journey because doctors and endocrinologists and anyone basically in the centralized healthcare didn't really do much, to be honest. Like it was just, I think, as you probably know, and your listeners know, it's like very much a band-aid approach. It's just targeting symptoms, not the root cause. And I became aware of that because it was happening to me. So I became super curious, like most curious I've ever been in my life, basically. And I just researched, yeah, as I said, like I did courses and then I was just like thinking to myself, I want to help people who were me 5 years ago that just like, they're in that centralized system where they're just going around in circles, where it's like, it's not like getting to the root cause. And I think the difference with me as opposed to other health coaches as well is like a lot of health coaches will just do blood work and just be like, okay, here's the protocol, here's 20 supplements to take them at this date, this date, this date, and you'll feel better. And that's all good and well. I think it like has its purpose, but it's like you want to empower your client. You want to bring the knowledge that you have to them. So then they don't have to deal with this later in life. Like they don't have to hire anyone ever again. And you basically, it's more of like a life transformation, basically, as opposed to healing symptoms, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, that's something that I saw on your website that was like who working with you is for and who it isn't. And it was like you've got to be ready to make lifestyle changes and all these like big things right off the bat, because otherwise you're probably not going to get very far, right? Do you feel like you could basically help anyone, or do you feel like there's still limitations to the kinds of people or things that you could like treat, for lack of a better word?
I mean, I think in terms of me and my business, it's better to, I suppose, niche down somewhat into people that I can really get good results with. And that's specifically targeting more so at like men with hormonal issues, dopamine issues, and maybe just men who just have seen multiple people and they just can't figure it out because these other people who are trying to help them don't understand like circadian biology. They don't understand the power of sunlight. All those kinds of things that are just very new in terms of research, although obviously it is like quite old, but it's just the new science and what we've created basically is like a detachment from that. But in saying that, like I do have multiple clients of, I'll have females. Like for example, I got a female tomorrow who's a mum of two, which is a bit different. But it's like, 90% men between 25 and 45-ish. But in saying that, it's like I can still definitely help everyone to a degree. It's obviously dependent on their N=1 and their context. But, for example, I've had a friend's mum come to me. She was getting breast cancer surgery. So I was helping her with that. It's just, but the thing with those types of cases is it's just like getting those fundamentals down pat because a lot of people are just missing that. They like jump into the supplements. It's like, okay, what supplements do I take? All that stuff. But it's like, let's just trace back and be like, are you breathing through your mouth or your nose? What's your posture like? Are you on technology at night? Are you getting any sunlight in the day? Are you seeing the sunrise? What kind of food are you eating? Like these are all the things that need to be addressed first. And then the supplements and the protocols and all those kinds of things can be a clutch. And again, you empower those clients to address those things, and they're gonna move the needle pretty much 90% anyway, you know? And then they're being educated and they have the knowledge to be able to do it on themselves too.
What is the N1?
So n equals one, like it's just basically the context of the individual of like not everyone's the same. So not every supplement for a certain person's the same. Not every diet for a certain person's the same. There's a lot of context there. It's like, where do you live? As I said, all the things before, that's playing a huge role. What kind of symptoms are you expressing? Like what's going on in terms of like your surfaces? Are you pale? Are you tanned? What's your vision like? It's just all these things need to be taken into account, and then you can make an executive decision of like what you can recommend to a client. Because you get people on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and they ask you for certain recommendations, and it's like, oh, what should I do for my high blood pressure? I'm just like, I don't know. Like I don't know you. Like the best things you can do, like just to move the needle, is just the fundamental stuff. Beyond that, you need to work with someone, because again, it's like my reputation's on the line if I'm giving advice to someone who I don't know the context for as well. And that's the thing I think with like Twitter and stuff. It's really, really great in terms of, I think I wrote like a status on this before, like a post. It's like Twitter is amazing for health advice, but Twitter is also really shit for health advice because it's just like extremely overwhelming for someone, And it's like you need people to help dissect your N equals one and your context, basically.
That's what I was thinking the other day is like we live in a time where basically any lifestyle you can find someone that's an expert in it and that will tell you why it's like the best lifestyle to have. And so for me, I think the responsibility is like fully in on the individual at this point. But so N equals one is just like a term for the person's whole context and background and all that.
Yeah. And it also like takes into account like what kind of occupation you have, because, you could be the same exact person eating the same diet, but then if someone works indoors compared to someone outdoors, that's going to be handled very, very differently because of the importance of light and things of that nature that the person outside is going to be yielding so much more of compared to that person indoors. So, taking into account things like that, stress is a big one. And then, yeah, as we said before, which we were speaking about, is like location's also huge in this day and age. What latitude you live in, the population density. Do you live in an apartment? Do you live in a house? Do you get sun on the balcony of your apartment? Do you not? Like those all can be playing huge roles. So it has to all be taken into account basically to really optimize that client.
How were you in school as far as learning?
Horrible.
Horrible.
Like, I mean, I think I had like some sort of potential. Like when I,
Some sort.
yeah, like, I mean, I just remember one time that I actually tried and studied for a test and I got like 98% or something. And I was like,
just
okay, well,
just
that's kind
one
of cool.
time.
And then that's it. I was like, okay, I'm one and done. I don't need to do anymore. It wasn't even like, it was just like a practice test too. It wasn't even like an exam. Um, and it was in like PE, physical education. But yeah, but then I'm pretty sure like the next one I didn't study and I got like 30%. So, it's just like, I just didn't have, as I said before, I didn't have that purpose or drive to learn. I was just like in school and I'm just like, why the fuck are we learning this shit? Like I'm learning like maths equations. I'm like, I'm never going to use this. Or just like English, like writing stories. And I just like, I hate this. Like this sucks, you know? So I just didn't try. And my parents didn't like me for it for a bit there. They're just like, you need to try harder, all these sorts of things. But yeah, I think having that purpose, and like if I make learning enjoyable and like yeah, if I make it all enjoyable and it's something I want to learn, I like to think that I'm quite good at it. But yeah, I mean, it's just like I just got to make sure I'm learning stuff that I want to learn. Otherwise, I'm in trouble.
Was there a like a hurdle that you had to get through when you first started looking at all these diagrams and like things moving around? Like,
Oh yeah. Look, if you showed me one of those diagrams that I put on Twitter or whatever, or any sort of like biochemical pathway or something, I would just look at you and just be like, what the fuck's this? You
yeah,
know, I have no clue what it is. So yeah, I think it was just the curiosity fueled that of like trying to figure out what everything is. So like I would see like a biochemical diagram of like a pathway. I'd be like, okay, so what's this receptor doing? What's this protein doing? Or what's this gene doing? And then what's this cascade doing? And what organelle is it influencing in the cell? So then it was like that biochemical level, trying to understand that. And I still definitely am trying to learn that sort of stuff. It's very, it's very hard to take it all in like 2 years, basically. So I'll probably have some blind sides in my language and terminology. But then yeah, it's like, and then I came into, Jack Cruise's work, and I was just like, I read one of his blogs and I don't think I understood one single fucking word of it. And I was just like, what is this? I'm like, this is just like a load of shit. Like this is just word salad, basically. But again, it tweaked my curiosity and I wanted to learn more. So I just kept reading them. I kept listening to podcasts. I got one of my dad's best friends he's very much centralized, but he's got a PhD in physics. So he was like mentoring me to help me understand certain concepts, which definitely helped move the needle a bit. And yeah, it all just started to click eventually. Like soon enough, it was like things start to make a bit more sense. I still come across stuff and I'm just like, I have no idea what this is. But then it's like, okay, I'm just going to look at research and see what it is. And yeah, that's just sort of how it's gone. And I've just been enjoying that journey. I've definitely very much reminded my purpose on helping people and being able to understand this and explain it in a digestible manner to people. Definitely helps.
yeah. I feel like that's the biggest factor for me would just be being able to have someone that can explain it in a way where I'm going to understand it. Because when I had Jack on the podcast, the first
Oh,
30
you had him.
minutes, yeah, the first
Oh,
30
yeah.
minutes he was talking about the biology of brain tumors, and I like blacked out for like 30 minutes, but I had to re-listen to it like 6 times before I started to put the pieces together. So yeah, that's what I look for now is just who is explaining this stuff in a way that I can understand it, because I'm not like I was terrible in high school. You put any textbook in front of me, it's like just I want to go outside and run and run away
Yeah.
from it. And I still have a big block. Like when I see your diagrams and all that, I'm like, just like keep look for something easier, you know. Um, and so yeah, that's awesome that that's something you prioritize, just making it digestible for your clients.
Oh, I was just gonna say that, yeah, in terms of like re-listening to Jack Cruz podcast, I can totally relate to that. I think there's been times where I've listened to it. If there's one that's like really good and really in depth and really resonates with what I'm learning at that time, it's like literally 4 or 5 times just to get it in my head. And I'm like taking notes. And I'm like, I still don't get what he means by this. And then like eventually like I'll listen to it enough times, or like I'll just randomly be going for a walk or something. And then it'll just like click in my head. I'm like, oh, that's what he meant.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, his brain is just insane. I don't know how he retains all that information and just splurts it out just without any notes or anything. It's just I could never.
Yeah, and then there's also the element, I don't know if you've run into this, but like it's not just learning something and being like, "Oh, that's amazing." It's also learning it and being like, "Oh, fuck, that means everything I thought I knew about this thing was false." And I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but I'll just throw it out in case you do. One of those things for me was when he started talking about how creativity is basically like mental illness. Do you remember that? Have you heard that or not?
I have, yeah. I remember when I heard that, it just like shocked me as well. Um, and I think I had to, that was one of those ones. I think there was like the human podcast he did with Human and Rick Rubin. He
Mm.
mentioned it in there. He slid it in there, and I was just like, I think I was in Argentina at the time, walking in the park, and I remember listening to it, and I'm just like, what? And then I had to like go back, and I was like, did he seriously say that? And then I had to think about it a lot. And he's mentioned it several times afterwards, and it's tied to how melanin works in the body. And I have done a lot of research on melanin as of lately, like probably the last 6 months. And when I found out that melanin so you got tyrosine, and tyrosine can form thyroid, it can form dopamine, it can form melanin, but then melanin and dopamine can form each other as well through various reactions, depending on light, depending on how much oxygen tensions you have. It can depend on like inflammatory signals, things of that nature. But when I found out that melanin and dopamine were interchangeable and that melanin can break down under certain conditions, then I was like, okay, that makes a bit more sense. So it's like that melanin that you build during the sunlight hours, plus on top of partially dopamine in certain regions, and then you can leverage that melanin to your advantage for creativity purposes. Basically, it's like we've adapted to do that when we moved into caves because light became a thing with fire, and we were able to break down melanin into dopamine back then. And that's why we became creative in terms of like, if you see in caves, there's lots of paintings, which before we moved into caves, there was nothing, no artwork, none of that sort of stuff. So that's where that creativity component came from. And now you just think of it in the modern world, like how much light and technology and all those kinds of things we have. It's like, okay, cool. Maybe we have a bit of creativity to a certain degree, but we're just burning the candle at both ends. Like the fuse is running out in terms of the melanin breaking down. And that's when dopamine becomes dysregulated. That's where we start seeking dopamine artificially through drugs and alcohol, technology, scrolling, processed foods, all those kinds of things. So yeah, it's cool how it all ties together basically. And it all just comes back to light at the end of the day, literally everything. And everything else is just secondary to that, basically.
Do you think the creativity as mental illness thing is that like creativity originates from a mental process that shouldn't have happened, or like if someone is very creative still to this day, that is a person that is you could consider mentally ill under this context. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I don't know if there's a threshold to creativity. I think there's some people who are like really creative and they're really healthy and they're in really good shape, and well, not really shape but just like in good like stages of their life in terms of health. But I think there's definitely like a threshold where you can go over, and you see people who are like really really creative, and some of them can be quite mentally disturbed potentially. You can see it like a lot in terms of like artists and the way they project certain things. They've had, a lot of things happen to them. Like it's just always a story in terms of connecting that. And I think in terms of creativity too, creativity, when it's been leveraged and utilized in terms of like writing or art or music or whatever it may be, it tells a story of that person's like well-being, their state of mind, their life, their history, all those kinds of things. That's just my thoughts on it anyway. I think it can be leveraged to our advantage, but you don't want too much creativity as well. I think it can also be somewhat of a distraction to other things too. You know.
Yeah. That's what I come back to is just that like I write books a lot. Like so writing's been a huge part of my life. And the more I learn about this and that I start implementing it into my life, the less I want to sit down in front of a computer and make up shit, or not even make it up, even if it's like nonfiction about my life. Like I'm just less drawn to that. And so it feels like it kind of checks out, when I hear creativity as mental illness. It's like, yeah, there's not, chimpanzees aren't like sitting down to write their life story or like make up
Mm.
fictional stories. It just seems kind of crazy once you actually sit down to think about it. At least it does to me. But speaking about story, I heard you talking about your story with sobriety and just kind of some like very, very vague trauma allusions. And I want to dig into that more if you're open to it.
Absolutely. Ask it. Shoot away. I can go as deep as you want.
Okay.
You
So
tell me what you want to keep it, like PG rated, M rated.
all the way,
Okay,
all
awesome.
the way. Um, Start just by telling me about like growing up before high school. Just what was your life like at home? What was your relationship with your parents like, with friends?
So yeah, I was pretty fortunate. Like I didn't have trauma per se, which I'm like very grateful for. I lived a very amazing childhood. Yeah, mum and dad, a sister, and a brother with autism on the more like mild scale, which is like honestly like a blessing because we can like communicate to each other. Yeah, very beautiful person. So it was really, really awesome to be able to be brought up along that and made me who I am today, basically. But yeah, like in saying that, like it was hard for us as a family too, because it was like we couldn't really travel, we couldn't go out for dinner, all those kinds of things that like, your standard family would do. Um, and then I think just in Australia in general is like it's very big, especially Melbourne and Sydney. They're like the two main cities. It's just like huge drinking culture, drug culture, just like it's just like something that you do. So I think it's just like you get brought up in these groups, and it's like, you can either like do drugs and drink alcohol, or you're just like left out basically. And it's like you want to always fit in, whether, like risk versus reward. Like I think at the time it was just like I thought like the drugs and alcohol is a better choice, because it wouldn't isolate me basically, or like my thought that it would isolate me too was also at the back of my head. So that came in early on, probably like 18, 19, 20. I think actually, no, I think I had like my first ecstasy pill at like 16. So that's pretty insane. We used to have like fake IDs and go night clubbing and all those kinds of things at a young age.
Same.
Which is like fun at the time, I guess, but like, it just catches up to you basically. And then, yeah, I suppose that fueled, like an imbalance in my brain chemistry, lower dopamine levels, more anxiety. And then I started to have like performance anxiety issues, erectile dysfunction. I used to think that I had to rely on like Viagra's and shit to have sex, all those kinds of things. Then on top of that, there was that issue, and then there was just more partying, more drugs and alcohol. And I think, as I was hitting my like mid 20s, it was just going on for too long. Then COVID happened, and then COVID was like the straw that broke the camel's back, basically. It was like a lot of partying during then. Like in Melbourne, it was just like insane. It was pretty barbaric the way they handled everything here. Lots of lockdowns. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't see your friends. You could barely see your family. So that's obviously alone a bit of a burden on your mental health. And then on top of my mental health wasn't strong to begin with at that time. So I think it all just synergized together. So yeah, my anxiety, stress, all those kinds of things were definitely at like it's at its peak. Got blood tests because like, yeah, like libido was low. I was fatigued, just really tired all the time. Just didn't feel like myself basically. And yeah, it came back with like really low testosterone, like really low, like lower than like a 7-year-old. I'm just like shit. um, and then I just, yeah, got like followed around through, like just jumping hoops with like doctors, endocrinologists, putting me on medication, like estrogen blocking medication to try and boost my testosterone up, which it did, but I still felt like shit because, estrogen also plays a role in a male's body, believe it or not. And yeah, all these kinds of things just started to synergize. And then that's when I was just like, I need to fucking do something about this. Like, no one's helping me in terms of like in the centralized system. And yeah, I just decided to pull my finger in basically. I just had enough. I kind of wish I had some guidance in terms of like a health coach, like myself potentially. But I just wasn't aware. And I stopped drugs and alcohol, fixed my sleep, and yeah, just started to make that more of a priority. And look, the first 3 months or so was pretty intense in terms of just like withdrawals, cravings, all those kinds of things. But then after that was just like everything got so much better, and it just keeps getting better and better. And then I started to feel like normal, which is like actually high dopamine. And I was like, wow, this is like how I'm meant to feel all the time. I literally feel like if you've seen Limitless, I felt like Bradley Cooper for that basically. Just like clear headed. I could like think clearly. I could just, and like just I suppose with my experience in terms of dealing with the medical system and just like in terms of COVID and all that shit. I was just like, there's just so much bullshit and it just doesn't even fucking matter. And I was just not serving a purpose besides like control and making us weak. And yeah, that's me basically. And then that fueled me to basically quit my old job, and travel and empower other people who might not be in this like a similar position, but like more or less like the same position as me, you know, 5 years ago, basically. I probably went fast tracked a fair bit there. So feel free to
That's
dissect.
yeah,
And
yeah.
if you want to go deeper in one section, I can do that.
Before we do that, what's your like? Where have you learned about trauma from?
Um, Dealing with clients, like I think, I had my first client with trauma maybe a year ago, and I understood like the significance of it somewhat, but then I didn't know like how significant it really is. And it's like literally you could be doing everything right, but if you're not addressing a certain trauma, or if you're not aware of that trauma, of like, that you need to deal with it and process it and release it, it's just like the biggest obstacle. It just holds you back. You're going to be, you'll always tick to like, say, if you're doing everything right, say 70%, but you'll never get to that 90 plus. And look, that comes with optimizing your health. I think your body knows when it gets to like that state of optimal health, getting to that 70 plus percent, working with someone. And, there's certain practices you can do. You can release that trauma, because your body's not going to deal with it when it's like sick, right? It's just going to make matters worse. So I think it's just like getting that stage of building that health up and being aware of how big of a deal it is. Because yeah, it's a huge, huge deal.
The reason I ask is because the first thing that you said was like I didn't really have any like traumas or like major trauma growing up, and
You do?
in sorry.
You as well, did you say?
No, I had I had all of the traumas, which I'm happy to share a little bit more about. But in the world that I come from, or that I've for the last 8 years have been learning a ton about trauma from people like Gabor Mate or all these.
Oh, you asked who I learned from, right?
What's
I just
that?
went on a rampage. You asked who I learned from, and I just went on a rampage about
That's
how
okay.
I can get that. So, yeah, it was like a lot of my own research definitely played a role. There's people on Twitter that do a great job of dissecting it. Grimhood's really, really good. I don't know if you follow him on Twitter. He's quite good at explaining all this, and in terms of like tying it in with like biochemistry of how like there's imbalances in the brain, basically. And that just literally affects everything downstream. But honestly, like besides that, like there's a few other people on Twitter that I've learned from, and that's majorly where I've learned a lot of it from. It's just, yeah, like just research. Tying in like the quantum side of things as well is plays a big role. Like whenever we have fear, or like, and that can be just like a negative thought, or it could be like that trauma that's like ongoing and slowly like, circles back in and out of your memories. That basically triggers hypoxia in your tissues. And when you have hypoxia, that means melanin gets broken down. That means you get a nice pulse of stress hormones. Your mitochondria stop working. They trigger something called the cell danger response. And that's when like your body literally has to go through this cycle to get back into homeostasis, to
Mm.
running optimally. And a lot of people, because of like stress and trauma, they will get stuck in like one of those phases. And then it's just like you are like, we're talking about that 70% before, and now it's very much gone down to like, running at 40 or 50%. And that's when burnout and things of that nature can occur. I can't remember the guy's name who actually came up with the cell danger response, or like has articles on it, but he's really good as well, to understand that on like that biochemical level.
What was the first guy? Greenwood?
Grimhood, Grimhood,
Okay.
um, Magnesium Puppy.
Okay.
So yeah, he's quite good at like he would definitely be one of the best ones to understand like stress and trauma. And he talks about it like in terms of like how there's GABA and glutamate, they're two neurotransmitters. One's the brakes and one's the gas. And if you have high glutamate, you've probably heard of like MSG, right? Where like in food,
Yeah.
yeah, in Asian food, and people can get potential like seizures from it and stuff. That's that G stands for glutamate. So having that in high amounts, especially just from the modern world, EMFs, stress and trauma, can really just create that pulse of like just overflow and neurotoxicity. And that's when like anxiety and discomfort is just on steroids, basically. And diseases can occur like in the brain and everywhere else, basically.
Do you still have any of that, or do you have like off days?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think I can just handle them a bit better now. More or less when I wasn't too healthy, I would have my off days and I'd just, play the victim mentality, just like let my emotions just like take over. And then I just wouldn't feel like myself. Whereas now it's like I get those, I get those urges of emotions and then I can come back to the baseline a bit easier. I think off days are just a part of the process, because if we were feeling good all the time and we knew something good was around the corner all the time, that's going to, then we're just going to constantly be happy and we have no contrast. So I think those off days can be God or the universe just like testing you as well. Because, yeah, I mean, I think everyone has off days. We're human beings, we're constantly being human being, like it's just how it is. It's just, yeah, being able to manage it and harness it and embrace it as well is a big deal.
What are some of the emotions that come up for you when you have those off days?
A little bit of fear, a little bit of sadness, anxiety, which probably ties into the fear, um, stress, all those kinds of things. Not so much like rage or anger per se, as I can control that a lot more than I used to. I used to like, for example, at my old job, if I like fucked something up or did something wrong, I would just like crack it and I'd like throw a tool. Like I was an electrical linesman, by the way, which is like I worked on pylons. So I'd just like throw a tool on the ground. I'd just be like, fuck. But now it's like I can retain that a lot more. Like it doesn't even come along. It's just like, oh, it is what it is. Like this is probably another thing that the universe and God's just like testing me with. It's like, you think you're a good worker or you're good at life, but then they got to throw a curveball at you every once in a while.
Mm.
But yeah, I think very much those emotions definitely come into play. More so, I think, yeah, nowadays it's just like a little bit anxious, a little bit stressed, a
Do
little
you
bit of fear.
know, do you know like what they fear of what, or what are they
Um,
relating to, I guess?
some could be work related, especially if work's doing good, and then you've got a good flow going, and then then 1 month you just might not get any outreach or clients committing to coaching or any of those things. Like you might get people reaching out, but then they just like don't execute. And then also it seems just like when that happens as well, like I'll get a bit of writer's block on Twitter. I'll be losing that motivation to learn. Kind of like that passion or purpose dampens a little bit. And again, I think it's just like tracing back to God and the universe testing you because you need that contrast. If you didn't have that contrast of like ups and downs, then there would be no perception of like how good you feel and how good you are doing, I think. And that's why I think in terms of like my my life with drugs and alcohol as well, seeing how shit I could feel, like and just witnessing that and now like getting that contrast, it's just like I'm like so glad that I had that part of my life because now it's like, wow, I can still trace back to those moments where I felt awful. And I'm like, wow, like you're just appreciating the journey and the changes that you made, basically.
Yeah, it's the one of the things from the circadian stuff about like you need the dark as much as you need the light. Like if you're just getting sunlight all the time, but then you're not getting enough dark, then like it's not optimal or whatever. And I think the same is true, like you're saying, with emotions. Um,
Yeah.
and it's interesting too. Like there's some parallels in our story, just as far as like I grew up in Cancun, Mexico, and
Oh, really? Are
yeah,
you Mexican?
yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. So you speak Spanish.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's why, yeah, when you said that, I was like, oh,
Oh,
nice.
well, yeah.
But hearing you talk about Melbourne and just that lifestyle, I'm like, oh, that's exactly what growing up was like for me too. It's like we had fake IDs and 16 years. I got drunk the first time when I was 13. So it just the corruption, I guess, of innocence starts like really, really young in these very, very strong party lifestyle places. But I'm curious because something that I ask myself a lot when I was first digging into just like my past and understanding all of this was like, where were the adults in my life at that time? And why did I have just like free reign basically to do all of these things? And that, going back to just the trauma stuff, like I think a lot of people have this misunderstanding that trauma is like rape or like war and PTSD from the war and all that, and that is one part of trauma. But then there's the more complicated stuff that I think most people experience, and maybe they don't even think is trauma, which is what I experienced a ton of, is just like neglect and like parents just not knowing what to do, doing their best, but just their best not being enough for a child at that time or whatever. And so I'm curious if you've kind of, when you hear that and you think back about your life, does it feel like there was any of that that might have kind of contributed to how you ended up in that kind of lifestyle to begin with?
Um, I'm not sure. Like, I think my parents did like such an amazing job. And I think it's hard because having an autistic brother, there was a lot of attention there in terms of that. But look, I think they did an amazing job, and I think it's more or less tied to just like the Australian culture, basically for me. Like it was like if they told me off, probably would have done it anyway, you know. They were pretty cool parents in terms of that. Like, like my mum helped me with like my first hangover, um, and things like that. But yeah, I think it was more for me, it was just a cultural related issue, and society in general in Australia. It's insane in terms of how we look at like alcohol and drugs and just the way we handle them compared to like, for example, like when I was in Argentina, they'll have like a steak for dinner. If they're out for dinner, they might have like a glass of red wine, like a nice glass of Malbec. And then, yeah, that's about it really. Like you don't really see them partying too much. So yeah, I think it's definitely ingrained in the culture. And even like other countries I've been to, like, I mean, a lot of places, they seem to not have the same problems as the Western world. And, I would almost classify like Cancun as like part of the
Yeah,
Western world in a way,
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, it's fascinating. I don't think like again, I think I'm blessed that I had no trauma, but yeah, it's just there was obviously like self-medication involved. And I think, yeah, as I said, with like I think the anxiety that I started to get in my early 20s, that was just like the medication towards it basically, and the numbness to forget and to be confident, I suppose. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting that like it sounds like at least for you, your parents were aware and like trying to guide you through, even if you're like in a party phase. Like I was hiding it from my parents and like, you know,
Yeah.
um, um,
Sneaking out the bedroom at night.
not just being like I'm gonna go spend the night at my friends and then spend the night means go out to a nightclub and get fucked up. Um,
I played that trick a few times as well.
yeah.
It's one of the oldest tricks in the book, isn't it? The old sleep over at a friend's house, but then go to a nightclub. Um, but yeah, I think my mum caught on pretty quick. I think it was like I did that one time when I was like 16. And like I think, yeah, like I came home later that day. She's like, you look fucked. She's like, you look absolutely rat shit. And then I just like couldn't lie to her because it's my mum. And I was like, yeah, look, I went night clubbing. She's like, "Oh, bloody hell." Um, yeah. And I was like the oldest as well. So like, and I would say, yeah, I was probably like the most rebellious. Like my sister's a bit of an angel, and my brother very much stays at home, doesn't socialize too much. So yeah, I was the first one that did all the crazy shit, and potentially the last one too. So at least you only had one out of the three playing up a little bit.
Yeah. I'm curious just briefly about the autism thing. Like I feel like nowadays people are like calling themselves autistic that I'm like it's not the
Mm.
same, and maybe that's why people say there's a spectrum or whatever. But I've met
Yeah,
people who are like, I guess, on the really high end of that spectrum, and it does not seem. It seems ridiculous to me to for someone that's on the low part of the spectrum to even call themselves autistic in comparison.
yeah. This is the thing. Like you see it on Twitter a lot. Like people like say, "Oh, that's autistic," or you got autism, or like they'll say "tism," and they'll say that, and it's just like, I really don't like when people do that. I think it's very, very insensitive to even say that. Like, I think people don't understand what autism really is. Look, I mean, there's obviously like tendencies in terms of like obsession about stuff, obsession about unusual stuff. For example, my brother fucking loves Mario. He loves Nintendo. Like you could literally just ask him anything about like what game was released on Nintendo from like a certain console, and he'll give you like pretty much the month of the day, basically. Um, but I think the word is just like very much overused. I didn't realize until I got Twitter, like how many people are just like using it insensitively. And even like retarded as well. Like people are just using that like a lot. And it's just I think it's just like not a nice word to both of them, just like not nice words to say. I think in terms of like the way they talk about it, like I think especially when people say like, oh, that's autistic in terms of someone who's like stupid or like dumb, that I think that's just like terrible. But even like the like obsessive aspect and stuff, I think humans can become obsessed with stuff. I think that's just part of being a human. You become fueled by passion and drive that, yeah, you get deep into certain topics. But I don't think it's like autism, because autism is definitely more tied to like social interactions, how you handle your emotions, how you handle like senses, like hearing, smell, taste. So it goes much deeper than what people say on Twitter. But yeah, I hate when people say it, honestly.
Yeah. With all the stuff that you know, and like, I'm sure you've heard Jack talk about autism as well. Is that something that you kind of have explored with your brother at all, or?
Not as much as I should. Like it's very complex. Like I've listened to people talk about how, what like the biochemistry behind autism, and it's just like it's very, very deep. And I think there's a lot of variance in terms of like where you are on the spectrum, and then just like what kind of stuff is going on a biochemical level. Like you got Stephanie Senna, for example. She's like talks about glyphosate, how that can affect, that can drive autism. The way that like you're able to sulfate things and transport neurotransmitters and hormones throughout the body is potentially linked to autism. Gut dysbiosis, mitochondrial dysfunction, just chronic oxidative stress at high levels in certain tissues. There's so many factors that it's very, very hard to gauge. But I will say it's like the rise in it, like it's pretty much undeniable that it is rising because of our modern world as well. And it's something that we need to definitely pay attention to, along like of all other diseases, of course. But yeah, it's very fascinating, like how it works, and like how there's obviously people that can't speak, and they're more or less just like making more noises, sort of thing. Whereas like there's people who are quite articulate, more like on the Asperger's region. Yeah, and they're really well spoken, but then they're just like they lack that social aspect. They can't talk to people. They can't make eye contact. So it's very broad amongst the symptoms and the spectrum, that it's just like it's it's endless. Like if I dived into it, I would not be able to figure out what is going on if I like did it for the rest of my life, honestly, because it's just there's so many variables and factors involved. Very fascinating though, very fascinating. And like, I remember seeing like a documentary of this guy who's autistic, who I believe he flew over New York City for like 15 minutes on a helicopter. And then he had this massive like poster per se, like huge. And he drew it all, like all the buildings to scale, basically, from the view that he was at. It's just like insane. So like their brains just work in like magical ways that, we can't understand as well, in terms of like memory and things of that nature. So it's very, very fascinating.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if there was something like that with your brother, but I was like, oh yeah, that he can fucking quote whatever database of Nintendo.
He's just like, it's like he's like went on Wikipedia and he searched every single game on Nintendo and just downloaded it all to his brain, into his hippocampus.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So there's two last things that I want to get into, and I don't know if we have enough time to get into both of them as much as I would like to. So I want to start with dopamine, and I kind of want to go through it like as if I was your client, and how you would kind of what questions you would ask, and all these things within the first, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes, I guess. And just I'll give you a little bit of context, I guess, for like my situation, and then how you would approach it. So I'm doing the sunrise thing, sunset, but I do live surrounded by power lines, and I work from home for the most part. I can have like my windows cracked open, but I'm on the computer a lot, on the phone a lot, and especially lately, like in the last month or so, it's just like to another level, the usage of these things, and just my like attention span, or like I just know I'm very low dopamine right now, and I know, I guess there's like things I could do, but I'm not sure what would move the needle the most, and what things I might not be aware of that might be easy fixes. And so just with that little bit, like what other information would help?
So I think it's very important to understand the mechanisms behind dopamine and what is going on there. I mean, do you have like low dopamine tendencies in terms of like wanting to check your phone all the time, or going for sugary treats, all those kinds of things?
Yeah.
Sweet tooth. Okay, cool. So basically with dopamine, if you think about it like ancestrally, what's going on there? It's like you get rewarded for doing good things basically, and it acts as like a reinforcing mechanism. So, for example, if you're out in sunlight, you get rewarded with dopamine and endorphins. Um, when you're, sex, love, kissing, all those kinds of things, that rewards you with dopamine and pleasure. Again, reinforces because we want to reproduce. That's like one of the mechanisms. Learning something, getting deep into like a topic, reading, you might have like a spontaneous pulse of dopamine when you learn, make a new connection in your brain. You learn something, and that's like a reinforcing mechanism. Okay, this is good, and we want to learn more. And then yeah, just like laughing, being with friends, all those like things that like make you feel good. It's like your brain rewards you for that, and like it's just reinforcing basically to do it again. And that's all good and well in the natural world, but then in the artificial world, we've obviously manufactured certain things to short circuit that system, that like it just goes way too high above the threshold, and it just literally sets the bar too high basically. And that's when like things of like nature, being outside, sunlight, sex, like getting an erection, for example, all those kinds of things. It makes it a lot harder because that mechanism of like the reward circuit is tied more to like artificial stuff now. So it's like porn, sugar, drugs, and alcohol, all those kinds of things. And I'm going to say that 99.99% of people are stuck in that circuit somewhat. Even like people in the health space, like, I mean, sometimes I catch myself if I like have a post that does well on Twitter, I'll be like, oh, fuck. Like you look at the notifications, you're like, wow, okay, check that. And then like 5 minutes later, there's more. You're like, oh, wow, shit. So you just got to remember that everything is out to get you basically. And it's all about being aware. I think aware is a huge aspect of that. And tying it back into what you're doing, it's like you just got to harness everything to your advantage. So as you were saying, like you were taking calls and like you work, I would definitely be, I mean, it looks very beautiful out there, like sunny on your grass turf out there. I would definitely be like swapping that over and working outside as much as you can. I would be taking calls while you're going for a walk, things of that nature. You would definitely have to be like somewhat restrictive in terms of like the dopamine things that like are drawn to, and be like catch yourself doing it, and just be aware that like, and understand in terms of this whole process that there's, when you are like repairing dopamine in your brain and all other neurotransmitters associated with it and hormones, there is like this period of discomfort. There's this huge period of discomfort that occurs because it's like you want those artificial ones. It's just like that's just how our brain's wired. And like you see it in rat studies all the time. they'll like literally stop eating food to like get cocaine, you know? It's just like insane. So it's very much wired into our DNA. And it's just like you have to get through that part of discomfort. And then, those things that are naturally stimulating for you, dopamine wise, they're going to come back. And then you're going to feel it. You're literally going to feel it. And then you'll want those low dopamine things like the sugar cravings, all those kinds of things, they're just going to be dampened a bit. I think like they're obviously like still there to a degree, depending on like lifestyle and all those kinds of things. But just like having that control, I think control is like a very powerful word in terms of that too. But yeah, it's like lots of sunlight. And then like that's when like supplements can be useful. Anything that aids in dopaminergic activity, like repairing circuits in the brain. There's something called GDNF, glial-derived neurotrophic factor, and that's found in lots of herbs. And that helps literally repair all dopamine pathways in the brain. Even like things like cinnamon have it. I believe ginkgo biloba has it. There's a lot of various herbs that stimulate that. And that can just be like used as a clutch as you start repairing your dopamine factories, basically. But yeah, it's very much just like mitigating whatever I think like the best one is just like getting outside, honestly. Getting outside and addressing stress and trauma. Sunset and before sunrise and after sunset is just darkness. All those kinds of things are going to move the needle the most.
How strict is the darkness thing as far as like my room at night is, pretty dark, but it's not pitch black.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, for me, for example, I haven't turned my downlight. I moved here 2 months ago. I haven't turned my downlights on like once. It's just like you get used to it too. It's like I have like a little red light that I carry around with me. But again, it just depends on like the n equals one of someone. So for your case, I think that's great. And I recommend people if they are at night and they, want something to do that's like in darkness, it's like listen to a podcast whilst your phone's on airplane mode. Maybe just do some stretching, breath work. And you'll find that you'll literally fall asleep by like 8 p.m. Like you're just knocked out because there's just nothing like stimulating you. And then you'll sleep. And that's when the repair mechanisms occur in the brain. The glymphatic system is, really activated during sleep. And that's when you're going to wash out any toxins through your brain and out of your brain, sorry, into your lymph nodes and lymphatic system. And that's when you can optimize brain chemistry basically. So I think darkness is a huge one. I think blue light blockers is a great step in the right direction, but it's only going to move the needle a little bit. And it's like, okay, we really need to be following like the principles of yin and yang.
Yeah, I don't really have trouble falling asleep. I have trouble staying asleep. Like I get up at least 2 or 3 times throughout the night, but the dopamine thing affects me more like just from when I wake up throughout most of the day. And what's frustrating is that I feel like I've been in points in my life where I don't feel the way that I feel right now with it, and it's great, but it feels like it's so easy to slip back into it, and it's such a steep climb out every time that yeah, it's just like it's very frustrating because like 2 months ago, I remember I wasn't looking at my phone first thing in the morning at all, probably for like the first 2 hours. And for the last month, it's like almost every day. It's the first thing that I do. Why did this start up again? Where did this come from?
Yeah, mitigation is key. For me, I just try and pray in the morning. Like I'll pray to God, for like a couple of minutes or whatever that takes. And then I'll just do like little intervals of like 2 minute things. So like, 2 minutes of prayer, 2 minutes of drinking some water and just sitting there being with your thoughts, 2 minutes of stretching. And then eventually that can be like, 10, 15, 20 minutes, or even just like forcing yourself to just like go for a walk and just doing it. And like, again, it's like tied to that discomfort thing, but like when you embrace that, it just makes you more powerful as well. So it's like, you like, it's literally just like doing it and like pursuing past the point of discomfort and you get there basically. But again, like it's also the fact that, as you said, like you're living in Austin as well,
Yeah.
and you're Mexican, like you're built for that beautiful, strong tropical sunlight. Like I've seen some Mexicans and they go very, very dark. They're like built for it. I'm sure like you never sunburn basically or never get red. It's just pure brown, beautiful brown melaninated color, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Unless I'm like, if I spend too much time not in the sun, then it can happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the most part, it's pretty hard to burn.
that's even more reason for you to be, yeah, like working behind you in the backyard, I think, and just
Yeah,
getting it all done, getting it done.
yeah. It's
And you,
just the fucking mosquitoes.
yeah, I mean, you could use a fan. You can get like a fan on you, and that helps get rid of them. But yeah, I mean, it just anything you can do to like mitigate and get outside is going to be huge needle mover,
Yeah,
100%. And
it's
obviously, like, stress trauma plays a big role as well, and not like overthinking stuff. I think it's just like a huge one in terms of clients is like overthinking health or whatever it may be, and just like surrendering to. I
yeah.
think that's huge.
It's funny to me. I feel like it's evident of how low dopamine I've been that I'm like, there's mosquitoes outside, but I can't stop for a second to think like, oh, well, there's solutions to mosquitoes too. You could get a fucking fan.
Absolutely. And the thing with mosquitoes is that they're attracted to people who are emitting too much light, basically, emitting too much light from their cells, and it's not being harnessed and leveraged towards other processes. So that's more reason to get outside, be grounded, get in the sun. So then that system works properly. And then, I mean, for me, like yeah, I haven't been bitten by a mosquito this whole year. I've been in the tropics basically, which I'm like very amazed by. Obviously, like other places like Australia is just insane for mosquitoes. So I wonder how it'd go there. But yeah, it's just fascinating in terms of that sort of stuff too.
What is that? You said mosquitoes are drawn to people that are emitting too much light. Like why would I be emitting more light than someone else?
So it'd be more or less like emitting UVC light that you're not harnessing from the sun, because we're meant to like, well, it's not harness from the sun, but like there's a process that like we can absorb sunlight and turn it into UVC light, like transduce it basically. And then we can harness that light for certain processes like building dopamine, for example, building like neurotransmitters from those aromatic amino acids that love absorbing UVC light. Cholesterol is another example there. And when that system is broken in terms of like, or just out of balance, basically, in terms of like lack of outdoor exposure and building up that quantum coherence in our system, that's when like entropy rises. And entropy is like a sign of just like organization within the cells and within our whole system basically becomes a bit dysregulated and disrupted. And that's when we can't like harness energy from our environment as well, basically. That's why it's super important to do those fundamental things. So you'll literally become like this amazing semiconductive battery that can just use all sorts of energy within ourselves and without like in the environment too externally.
That definitely resonates because I feel like I spend a good amount of time outside, but I don't feel like it's doing it. The impact that that's having doesn't feel like it correlates with how much time I'm spending outside. So it feels like, yeah, like some mechanism of absorption or something is not, hasn't fully gotten fixed.
The more the better, basically. Especially with people who are like have origins from like the tropics. They like are literally built to be outside all day, building up that melanin. And again, as we said before earlier in this podcast, melanin, you build up that melanin and then you can break it down into dopamine at certain instances when sunlight's not present, for example, So that's just another reason. It all very much ties to the more outside time you get, the better. And I've seen that with clients. It's just like, there's all sorts of things I could recommend, but it's just like the first one is just like just get outside, basically, and do your best you can in terms of that too.
Yeah. Let's get into dating, just the last 10 minutes. What is that like for you traveling? And how has dating shifted for you with COVID, with learning all of this stuff, if it has shifted at all?
Yeah, I mean, I was in a relationship until 6 months ago, and we very much grew apart. And yeah, we're just different people, I suppose. Like I started gravitating more towards the health stuff, and I was probably a bit more extreme back then. I've taken a step back in terms of micromanaging my life, which, I think that can be quite detrimental to like one's own health. But yeah, I mean, it can be difficult. There's obviously, higher levels of being selective, I guess. Which, I think it's a good thing because a lot of dating is just bullshit anyway. It's just like casual sex and, going on dates and just like I think that's just like literally a part of just like the low dopamine cycle. And I mean, there's people out there, like there's definitely people out there, there's people that I've seen traveling that have like same values and things of that nature. But I think it just very much separates you from those people that you don't want, and you know more about what you want basically. And what that's going to yield in the long run is like you're going to have like such a strong connection with your significant other in the future because you guys align on so many more levels basically. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And
Hmm.
that's also ties into the post you shared that I brought up in the Kira podcast about electrons.
Yeah. I mean, it made sense for me. It made sense for like several people I've seen in relationships that I know, clients. It's just like, yeah, I mean, and I think Kira really dissected it very well and spoke about it very beautifully. So I would recommend people to listen to that podcast in that section because it's really well said. But yeah, it's like it just clicked for me one day and I was like, okay, so if there's positive and negative in terms of like how a battery works, and that happens to us as well. I mean, for example, at my old job, I've been like I've had an electric shock before. It's like I'm the positive and the electricity is the negative. It's gone through me basically, and that's what happens in terms of relationships. So if it's an ongoing battle of like one has more electrons, has higher redox, and the other person has lower redox, slightly more unhealthy. It's just like there's just going to be this division there basically where one might love the other one more, the other one might not love the other one as much. Even things like libido, that might diminish, even though your hormones might be like optimal and like all those kinds of things. And that can just be a kettle of fish of you overthinking that you have low hormones or something's wrong. But it could just be what we literally just spoke about in terms of high electrons versus lower electrons, basically. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely other factors involved, but I think it's like very much like a core principle there. And yeah, I mean, like you can get electrons from other things too. Like, when someone massages you, I think it's also like the way that they massage you is like they're giving you electrons basically. And you got to think like the oil is like, essentially aiding in that conduction. And then I've heard Jack Cruz speak about like in a recent podcast that if you have like a head massage and there's those wire things that like push down your head and it feels really good. Or if someone's like massaging your head, it's pushing electric current down towards your brainstem, and that helps relax you and innovate sleep basically, because it's tied to sleep and like parasympathetic nervous system. So it's super cool. It's super complex and interesting, but yeah, I suppose it's just like it can also be so simple too. It's just like positive versus negative, basically. And then yeah, if it's an ongoing battle between those, in a relationship with those two things, then yeah, there's going to be problems long term on a subconscious level.
Do you think that that played a role in why your relationship ended?
Um, Probably partially, I think. Also the fact that we just grew apart in terms of our outlooks on life. She was from America as well. So it was just that sort of ongoing battle between where we wanted to live. I think I was probably selfish at the time as well. But yeah, I mean, I think it plays a role in all relationships, basically. There is that going on a subconscious level, whether we know or not. Like there's no like real raw proof, but it makes a lot of sense to me.
Hmm. How long was the relationship?
Like 5 years. So long relationship, yeah. And yeah, I was at a family's house when we separated. And then
Wow.
I flew to Argentina literally 2 days later. So it was like pretty scary, because you obviously rely on each other and you become a part of each other, I suppose, in terms of just like each other's lives. So it was just like this snap where I was just in like like a non-Western country by myself, different time zone to like my family and friends. So I felt very isolated that first month, but I think it's just like understanding that it was for the best, basically. And yeah, it's just like a part of life you learn from relationships. But yeah, unfortunately, yeah, sometimes you just grow apart, and that's just like that's life, basically. That's what happens.
Do you feel like 6 months? I mean, I know that there's no timeline to these things, but like, do you feel like 6 months out, you've kind of healed from it and you're ready to be dating again, or are you still in the cocoon phase?
No, like I'm ready to be dating again. Like, I mean, I went on a few dates, yeah, when I was in South America. But yeah, I mean, it was just people that I didn't like very much resonate with as well. It was just more or less just for like company, I guess. And just like, practicing Spanish, which is also great. But yeah, I mean, I've definitely healed, and it's just like just waiting. Like, it's just I'm not impatient in terms of like waiting for the right person. also I guess it's like fortunate that I'm like introverted as well. So it's like I'm very much in that stage where I'm like focusing on my business, kind of just yeah, just learning and growing in terms of that as well. So that's very much been a priority as of lately too. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure like the right person always comes around, right? Just like more of a waiting game more than anything. And yeah.
Where do you meet women?
Um, well, to be honest, I don't really meet too many. But I do. Like it's like obviously if I'm out at like a cafe or something, there might just be a conversation or something, or like through friends of friends. Yeah, I mean, I did try like one of those dating apps when I was in South America, and I just think it's just part of that low dopamine circuit. It's just like you make all of these matches and all that bullshit, and then yeah, it very much nothing gets executed basically in terms of like meeting up or whatever. It's just like stupid, pointless conversations. And again, I think that's tied to like electrons as well. Like it's like, how are you meant to know what someone's like if you don't meet them in person? And it's like, I think you like when you meet someone organically like that as well, for the most part, it definitely you know a bit more in terms of like closure as to whether they're the right person or not. But I mean, online dating is very much a thing now, especially like in this space, I guess, like when people have very specific wants and needs. It's just, it can be easier to resonate with certain people online, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it almost feels like there's a new category of online dating that's like
On Twitter.
un- yeah. That's awesome, man. It's so cool what you're doing. It's honestly, we didn't really get into this too much, but it's inspired me to just start thinking about traveling or like at least moving somewhere else for a little bit. I think it's one of those things that I put kind of limitations on, and it's not actually that challenging to do, just to like just go to this place for a month, like, and it's easy to stay stuck in like, oh, well, I'll do it next year or I'll do it 3 months from now, and
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the best things that I've ever done, like just to do it and move around, just made me learn a lot more about life and what I wanted. And like just observing how other people live, like compared to where I'm from in Melbourne, there's so much less like bullshit and like woke people here, like, and yeah, it's just like people are just living life here how it should be basically. It's like a lot more family driven, community, self-sufficiency, and just simplicity as well. I think it's huge. But yeah, I mean, there's a quote that we could probably end with that I think is like a really good one. And it's relative to you and anyone who wants to, like quit their job and travel. It's just like fear what you know, like don't fear like what you don't know, basically. It's like people get stuck in this trap of like working and, it's like comfortable, but it's also just like, it's not doing it. They're not unlocking their full potential basically, but they're also fearful of like, quitting your job and like doing what I'm doing basically. Cause it is like full on, like it's a big deal. It's a big change. But again, it's like, it could be the best thing that you've ever done. And that's like me, for example, like I don't regret it at all. So I think it's like very much thinking about that quote and, even just giving it a go. It's like you can always come back. There's always going to be life, family, friends, and like you can always get your job back, or you can always get a job similar, So yeah, I think it's just like I think it's awesome for people to just step out of their comfort zone a bit. If it's like, a little bit like scary or fearful in like a good way, it's probably like a good sign that you should do it.
yeah, that's beautiful.